Hi, welcome back. My name is Kimberly, and today we're going to continue with part two of a series that I started about King David, and I connected it to journaling. Now, in our first segment, we talked about the beginning story of David. David is a very, very, very famous biblical character, and he is well known because he defeated Goliath. He's well known about his infamous story about sleeping with Bathsheba. He's well known because he was a shepherd who was overlooked by his own family but chosen by God. Now, I've always hesitated to share about King David because I feel like his story has been hijacked by people who've never walked the walk. And by that, I mean, often people are preaching about King David, but they weren't actually overlooked. They weren't left out of their families. They just like the character. It's different when you actually have lived being left out of your family. And so I speak about this from a place of being an adoptee, one that is in reunion with my family, but having grown up separated from my actual identity. And so when I studied the Bible, when I read the Bible, when I looked at King David's story, when I read the Psalms and I read things like, when my mother and my father forsake me, God will take me up. Those words resonate on a different frequency level for me. That's not to say they can't mean something to everyone, but when you've truly walked in that path of being left out, when you can read David's story and know that you were not counted amongst your parents' children, know that you were left out, it is going to resonate a lot differently. Now, I didn't share this in my first video, but I also come to this story with a background studying the Bible, studying the Word of God. I do have a master's in divinity. And so I normally take that work that I did, that I studied, and I usually apply it in my writings. And so I'll write, for example, in my PhD program, I look at how women use storytelling to heal, how they're connected to ancestral ways of healing. I look at it through the lens normally of biblical marginalized women. Excuse me. And so I apply it in my studies, but I also apply it in my own personal biblical time. And so whenever I'm reading characters, when I'm thinking about this, I am thinking about it and applying the training that I do have with my master's in divinity, that I earned in interdisciplinary studies. And so I just wanted to bring that to the forefront. This is very informed work. This is work where I did some work to even be able to, bring the breakdown that I'm bringing. It's not to say you need that degree to be able to bring this breakdown. It is just saying that I do have it. I do have that credential. And I wanted to share that with my audience, so that they just know how I'm coming to this story. And so today we're going to pick up where we left off. One of my earrings fell off, but the other one's still here. We are going to pick up in 1 Samuel. We were in chapter 16. Now, where we left off was where David had just been anointed by Saul. The story goes, not anointed by Saul, anointed to take Saul's place. So the story goes, Samuel, who was the prophet, came to Jesse's house. He was sent there by God to anoint the next king. And Jesse chose to overlook David, leave him in the field. But David was the chosen, anointed next king. And so Samuel ends up going through each one of Jesse's sons, only to say, ain't none of these folks the one. Where's your other child? Because God said it ain't none of them, but he said it's one of your sons, right? That's just the layman's terms. And so Jesse goes, oh yeah, I got my youngest son. Yeah, I left him out. He in the field, right? They go and get David. David is ultimately the one. Samuel can now anoint him and go home, right? Because Samuel had been on this whole journey. He had to travel. He had to seek. He had to go and do all of this work to try to get the next anointed king. And so we pick up right after that happens. And I read out of the Message version. And so at the very moment, the Spirit of God left Saul, and in its place, a black mood sent by God settled on him. He was terrified. Saul's advisor said, this awful, tormenting depression from God is making your life miserable. Oh, Master, let us help. Let us look for someone who can play the harp. When the black mood from God moves in, he'll play his music and you'll feel better. Saul told his servants, go ahead, find me someone who can play well and bring him to me. One of the young men spoke up. I know someone. I've seen him myself. The son of Jesse of Bethlehem, an excellent musician. He's also courageous, of age, well spoken, and good looking, and God is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse requesting, send your son David to me, the one who tends the sheep. Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with a couple of loaves of bread, a flask of wine, and a young goat, and he sent his son David with it to Saul. David came to Saul and stood before him. Saul liked him immediately and made him his right hand man. Saul sent word back to Jesse. Thank you. David will stay here. He's just the one I was looking for. I'm very impressed by him. After that, whenever the bad depression from God tormented Saul, David got out his harp and he played. That would calm Saul down and he would feel better as the moodiness lifted. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. The fact that David was overlooked by his own family. And so what happened to David, he was left out, but David was also a part of the family in a way where he tended the sheep. He was a shepherd. It was a position that had him in the field. And so back to my original story of how he was overlooked, he was tending the sheep the day that Samuel showed up at Jesse's house to anoint the next king. David was in the field. He was with the sheep. And so as a shepherd, that meant David lived a somewhat lonely life. Of course, he went in and out of his home, I'm sure for food, for supplies, to rest, but you had to tend the sheep. I don't know how many sheep David's family owned. I have to look into it. But he was the one who was responsible to make sure nothing happened to these sheep. He honed a lot of his writing, his skills. And I'm not going to say writing in the sense that we know it, but the way he started coming up with these psalms, coming up with his music to God, coming up with his worship. He did that in a place of being lonely, of being in the field, tending the sheep. He came up with all of these psalms. In fact, this is my next point. What it was for David to be overlooked by his family, to be deemed as not important, for his talents not to be recognized. King Saul saw those talents immediately and was like, he's the one. I need him. I appreciate his gifts. He can now stay with me. And so my first point was that David was elevated. While he had been overlooked by his family, he ended up elevated by the king himself. And so that's a very important point, right? He was already anointed by Samuel, but nobody knew yet that King David was King David. This news hadn't gotten out. It was dangerous to release this news. So when you see that King Saul had this tormenting spirit, King Saul was losing it. He was going out of it. He was going insane in another way, right? A better way to say it. And because of that, Samuel the prophet was not trying to say anything about a new king to Saul, baby, because he was probably going to lose his life. That's how the story goes, right? And so, yes, David was anointed, but he was not yet appointed to the throne. He was anointed, but he was still serving, right? And he ended up serving the person whose place he was about to take eventually. And so another point is God makes you serve what you're called to transform. So David served Saul in a system where he would one day replace him. David learned kingdom dynamics from inside the palace, right? Before he ever wore a crown. I believe, I have to double check this, David ended up becoming king like at 30. But at this point in his story, he's probably like 16, 17. He real young. So he's getting placed in the palace, but he's not yet king. Um, and so he learned those dynamics from inside the king. And this is where his spiritual maturity was born. He had private anointing, but he had to be humble in public. He could not run up on King Saul and say, "Oh yeah, I'm here to like take the throne, baby." Now, Side note, I know we live in a time, in a culture, where we pop off, where we make announcements, when we want to let people know who we are and what we're here to do, and blah, 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 blah. But if we do this before the appointed time, it's not good. It could be dangerous for so many reasons. I really don't have time to get into on this, you know, but it was a good thing that young David was humble. Now, I started talking about how he was left out, but being left out, being on his own, being in the field, learning how to tend the sheep, etc., 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 all set King David up to be humble. It set him up to understand that maybe it's not the time to speak up. It set him up to rely on God's leading. And so this was very crucial. While on the flip side, I do think it is extremely messed up that David's parent, his father specifically, overlooked him in another regard, right? Him being like formed alone, him learning what he learned, it really served him well. Of course, two things can be true. It can be hurtful to be overlooked, it can be hurtful to be left out, but it can also be a season of development. Do with that what you will, that applies differently to everyone. I'm not here to have debates about it. I just know often we are formed in isolation, and it can look harsh, it can be lonely, right? But that doesn't mean we're not getting the formation that we need. And so um I'll go ahead and ask questions now. What has God anointed you for that you haven't been appointed into yet? And so I want you to really think about this question. Looking at King David's life, is there an area where you are anointed but is still in development? Am I willing to serve someone else's vision while God prepares me for my own? This is a big deal as well. Often when we're serving someone else, it can feel like it's taking forever, but you're learning, and you're learning in a place of safety. And by that I mean, if you're serving someone else, you're learning close up, but you're not yet responsible fully for the results. You have space to make any kind of mistakes or just to learn, right? Where does my calling feel delayed, right? And how can I journal and pray through that waiting? Now, back to how David formed the Psalms in a period of isolation. Okay, so I do not think David was formally educated. So I believe David in the field tending to the shepherds was writing these songs, memorizing these songs, coming up with the music because he played the lyre, right, or whatever. So he was coming up with this. And it's easy to remember lyrics when they're put to music. And so David had a lot that he could pull from to serve King Saul when he was losing his mind. And so he was there when King Saul started like having these episodes. David could pull out his instrument and he started singing all the songs he had written when he was by himself. In fact, we get the biblical book of Psalms from David taking all of the lyrics, putting them to music, having this was once he got appointed as king, right? Having the choirs put them to music, having musicians put them to music. He brought what he had still at that point and placed it, had it placed in written format, right? So had the scribes write it and had it placed in scrolls, and it had been preserved. And so that's how we get the book of Psalms. Now, the book of Psalms is not entirely written by King David. The book of Psalms also has other writers, other musicians, but I think the majority primarily has been attributed to David. And again, it came from this place when he was writing by himself in isolation. And so Psalms 27, one of my favorite Psalms, it says, an exuberant declaration of faith, a Psalm of David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and foes, they stumbled and fell. Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may rise against me, in this I will be confident. One thing I have desired of the Lord that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire of his temple. And so he goes on in this psalm to say, um, hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy also upon me and answer me, right? Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not leave me. Do not forsake me. O God of my salvation, my favorite verse, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take care of me. This is very important. And so you see in the Psalms, David taking his own experiences and just weaving them so beautifully into what he is creating his music to be, into his poetry. I like to say into like his journaling. And so you can think about songs, they start out as a thought. Some people are able to put them to paper, so they could be journal thoughts, they could be what you're going through, right? And so I'm connecting this whole series in showing how you can use journaling, right, in the same way King David used his psalm writing, right, to work through and to get out your issues, your problems, the things that are going on. Because I'm a very big advocate for journaling. I have my own journal. The journal will be linked in the description. You can get it on Amazon, where I'm just saying a good thing to do is to work through things that you have going on and to work through them on the paper, in a journal, in some sort of format. You don't have to buy a journal if you have a notebook and a piece, just a piece of paper, pen, somewhere you can write. But it's a good idea, right, to take what you're going through and start processing it through journaling. And so that's what this series is about. But Psalms 27, one of my favorites, like I said, continuing, teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a smooth path because of my enemies. Do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. I would have lost heart unless I believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And so you can just hear from those words the way he just prolifically poured out his issues, his problems. David, like, wait on the Lord. David, like, child, I would have fainted around here if I wouldn't have thought that I would ever see God's goodness. Hear it in his words. And so, how does this resonate with you? Have you been in seasons where you were waiting on God, where you were praying about something, where you felt like something wasn't coming to pass? Baby, I know I have. I've been in a season like that. If I'm honest, I'm always seeming like I'm in a season like that, because you can pray for something, get it, and then there's this next level to get to, right? There's the next thing that you prayed for. And so it's not always you get the thing and you through with prayer. You get the thing and you just arrived. Even when you arrive now, right? Like King David, you arrived in the palace. You arrived in this position that's setting you up ultimately for your destiny. Now, baby, you really need the Lord. Now you really got to pray. Honey, now this journal is finna get triple filled, right? Now you really are waiting on the Lord, relying on God, pouring out your heart, developing. Being in seasons of development is hard. I don't want to talk about it because I may break down and cry, but it is an interestingly hard thing to be being developed fully in your gifts and your callings. And gifts and callings are so many and so varied that I don't want to limit them to just, singing and dancing and instruments, or even just talking and writing, blah, blah, blah. There are so many gifts that are in the world, right? And so I want to leave this very broad because I want you to hear and see yourself and your story in this, in that waiting, in that development. Again, I was always hesitant to overly talk about King David because I feel like the church kind of over talks about King David and it got on my nerves, right? But his story is so relatable, especially before he's king. Now everybody not gonna be no king around here, okay? Duh. But his beginning story, his development, his real painful being rejected, being left out, his development right under King Saul, soothing the demons while King Saul running around like, I'm going to find whoever think they going to replace me. Whole time it was David. This king was running around looking for the replacement, and God had placed the replacement right under his wing. Oh no, right? It sounds like it could be a movie, honey, like a drama. And I mean, not like a churchy movie, but like, okay, you just take the story and then you make a really dope movie out of it. Anyway, this is a very interesting position that David was in. David remained humble. It was scriptures where David was like, I will not fight Saul. Saul, was after David, trying to kill David. He was like, I will not raise my hand against God anointed. Mind you, the anointing had left King Saul and was resting on David. David still honored the position that King Saul held. That's a whole different, honey, I don't think I'm ready for that one. That's a different video that I'm not even gonna attempt unless God tell me I have to. Cause what? Not you trying to kill me, right? Literally. I'm not saying figuratively. Anyway, so this was the part that we were talking about today. I will definitely link the questions that I had. Let me see. Make sure that I covered everything that I wanted to cover. Listen, like David, I know what it feels like to be left out, not just emotionally speaking, literally left out, right? My life didn't begin, in my family just like David, but like David, God did make room for me in places that I didn't expect, that weren't expected of me, that I had no idea room would be made for me in. And so again, I come to this story humbly relating to David in some ways, right? This is just, whoo, I'm going to link those journaling prompts. But listen, I want you to check out the story for yourself. I read Psalms out of the New King James Version, but I read First Samuel out of the Message. The Message is my favorite translation. I like very easy to understand everyday wording. I don't really care for lofty, hard to understand words, even though I know there is a place for all of it. My favorite is reading it and understanding it in terms I would actually use. And so definitely check out the story for yourself if you want to. You don't have to physically read the Bible anymore. You can listen to it. Somebody else can read it. There are all kind of apps where it can just be playing. And so learning the word of God is different now, and you have so many avenues to just explore that. And so I would like to invite you to read it for yourself, get what you get out of the story, come to it with your own understanding, your own background, your own history, and let it just minister to you. I will catch you on the next video. Thank you, and I will see you later.